Welcome back, guys, to Murray's Minis. Never fear, Will is here. So today we are going to be talking about how to paint yellows on Space Marines, but not just any yellows. We are going to be talking about beautifully blended, desaturated yellow mixed with complementary tones to create really deep colours, but also push it slightly to a grayscale to give it an earthy appearance. Something that will make your yellows look more natural, more gritty, and a little bit more grimdark than your typical very bright Imperial Fist Space Marines. So grab your coffee, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and if you're feeling very generous, please support the channel on Patreon. Here we have the finished model, and you can tell there's a lot of interesting shadows, a lot of different blends, and we're going to use a lot of complementary colours, not just on the yellows but on the reds as well. Also, if you are a supporter on Patreon, you will have a chance to win this gorgeous Imperial Fists Praetor in Murray's Miniatures first monthly miniature giveaway. Try saying that 15 times on camera when you have a stutter. Our first step is to prime the model in Molotow Purple. Now, you don't have to use this colour specifically, just do a black primer, either airbrush or spray can will work, and just pick a nice deep purple for your first layer. Now, this is complementary to yellow, so this will be our colour for all of our primary shadows. With the greens, I used USAF green, which is a nice mid green. Don't forget, we're going to be doing oil washes and shades that will help to bring this tone down. I mostly used the airbrush on flat areas where I wasn't too concerned about overspray, and after that I went in with my paintbrush just to do the areas that were just far too finicky, far too small to comfortably get an airbrush in there without having tons of dirty overspill. But don't worry too much, because there's going to be a lot of blending of colours, so it's not the end of the world. Now, I used neutral grey ink to be the first zenithal highlight colour. This I slap over both. It's not that much of an issue at this point to be layering your inks. I used a nice mid yellow colour over all of it. I'm doing it over the red cape as well, but because red and yellow are so close on the colour wheel, it's not going to affect the red when we put that down. Now I'm going to use a white ink just to establish the highest lights of yellow and red on the model. You don't have to use the grey step. I chose to because I wanted all of our blends to be really natural and smooth. You can just use white and just be a little bit more gentle with the application. Now those passes are done, and you can see we've got some nice smooth blends. And I use a red ink. You can absolutely use contrast for this step. I chose red ink because it's a very nice saturated red colour, very bright and vibrant, and this will help when we sort of take it down a step with the oil washes. Once again, going back in with my brush because I'm just not that confident with my airbrush control that I'd be able to get in all of those nooks and crannies without making a complete mess of the entire thing. Now, slap a coat of matte varnish down because I wanted the texture on this to be very gritty, and I wanted the matte texture and finish to soak up those oil washes. At this point I did a bit of work off camera. I base coated the bronzes, the silvers and the belt and some of the grey tones as well. The reason why I didn't do this on camera because I was really struggling with tremors and I was shaking all over the place, and if I had to focus on doing this on camera as well, it just would have been a shaky mess and it wouldn't have been particularly pleasing for you guys to watch. So I did all of that work off camera. Not that it's particularly important, it's just base coating those additional colours. So when we come to the oil stage, there's all of the primary colours are on there and we can start adding tones to them. These are the oil colours that I used for this particular paint scheme. Most of them are from a cheap Winsor & Newton set that you can pick up on Amazon for relatively cheap. They're good for washes because they're already quite thin. There's quite a lot of linseed oil in them. If you want more consistency with your painting, I would probably suggest going and getting some artist paints. because they have a lot less oil in them and a lot more pigments, which makes them a little bit more suitable for every type of painting that you're going to do. I'm going in and I'm adding the purple wash to all of the yellow areas. I'm also doing it into the greys as well that I want to darken up and just add a little bit of colour into the deepest recesses. But this stage will bring out your shadows, it will smooth out your airbrush work really nicely. I'm now adding in the green to do the exact same effect onto all of the reds, but this will smooth out your work. I left these to dry for about 10 minutes. Because there's a lot of oil in these paints, they will dry slower, but just be gentle with the way you remove them with your cotton buds. If you scrub too hard, you're liable to go through the layers of varnish and through the layers of paint. The only reason I actually varnished this time was because I wanted the armour to have a gritty texture. If you're gentle with the way that you remove your oils, you don't really need a varnish. I know the temptation is that you want to protect the work that you've already done, but it's not that necessary. Acrylics are actually very, very tough if you don't abuse them. But I also do have a habit of abusing them. I'm very, very rough with them. As you can see, I'm taking a lot off and I'm doing a lot of rubbing of the paint, which probably isn't the best idea, but I just wanted to get all of the stuff out of the brightest areas and just have the purples and the greens laid in the deepest recesses. But you can see that it's already bringing out the shadows. We can remove it on the highest areas and it leaves a wonderful effect. So now I'm using my artist paints to start picking out the highlights and the shadows. Now my process is that I like to pick out one colour at a time across the whole model, and then I blend it. So you can see I'm picking out the areas that are the high points that have got the brightest colour on them, and I just want to saturate those yellow parts a little bit more, and I'm going through the entire model adding just little dibs and dabs of paint. Sometimes I'm adding just lines where it's a very, very sharp corner, where it's a point where it's maybe a little bit more rounded, a little bit more of a circular surface. I'm then adding blobs, dots, circles, and starting to blend it into the existing wash that's down there. The paints that you put on at this stage will absolutely mix with the oil wash that you already have down, because that will stay active for a little bit. And now I'm going to go in with white. This will be the first white layer. There's going to be a couple of times which I will go through and start building up the highlights with this, because if you blend very, very hard into the yellow that you've laid down, you can get a really natural, smooth progression into a very vibrant yellow. But if you want to push it even higher into more of a white, you've got to add multiple layers, and multiple times you need to go in and just dab it in there and gently smooth the paint through. You can actually do this type of painting with acrylics. It's just going to take you a lot more time. You're going to need to use a lot more glazes and a lot more techniques which take time. The benefit of using oil paints is that you can get quick blends really easily with actually a minimal amount of work. It doesn't take an awful lot of blending to get it nice and smooth, unlike acrylics where you have to go with very, very sort of watered down, gentle layers, either with wet blending. But you'll find that oils wet blend so much better than acrylics. They are absolutely fantastic for this job. It's what they were made to do, and there's a bit of a fear of using them on miniatures, but they are absolutely fantastic, and the rewards absolutely outweigh all of the downsides when it comes to painting with oils, because you can get such quick results that are really smooth, but you can also go very, very grimy, very, very dirty with them. It absolutely depends on what you want to do with them, but just go by step, smoothing it out. Try to make sure that you're not leaving too much paint on the model when you are blending. I tend to do one blend, dab it all through, get it all mixed out, and then I just wipe my blending brush onto a piece of kitchen roll and just make sure that there isn't that much paint on that existing brush when you come to do more blends. Now I'm adding the purples to accentuate the shadows. I did have a little bit of problem with this because the paints that I'm using are quite cheap. They're not very expensive paints, and as I said, they have a lot of linseed oil in them, so that can make blending, especially in your darker areas, a little bit more difficult. It makes it a little bit more subtle, which isn't a bad thing if you're starting out, because you want to be subtle, you want to trial it out and experiment a bit. But I would probably suggest, if you're going to be doing this technique a lot, investing in some nicer paints than I've got here. One way around this is that with the 2 red tones that I used, I put the paint onto a bit of kitchen roll, and that soaked up a lot of the linseed oil. They're still very oily, still very wet, but you can see that they work very well even if they have a lot of oil in them. It just means they're going to take a little bit longer to dry than ones that have less oil in them. So I'm going through again, just layer by layer, gently adding more and more paint, making sure that before I move on to a step, that the colours, especially on the red cape that I wanted to be really saturated and vibrant in the high areas, that the colours are as saturated as they can be before moving on to the next. So I'm using quite a very bright red, it's borderline orange, just to establish the high tones. But if you go too far and it's looking a little bit too bright, a little bit too saturated for your liking, you can just go back in with the colour before, or your shadow colour, which in this case with the red is the complementary colour of red is green. So this is the colour we're going to be using for all of the shadows, and you can slap them in there and it just desaturates those colours. So I'm going into all of the recessed shadows. I've added a little bit of white spirit into that green just so it blends a bit quicker, it dries a bit quicker, and it gives a bit better and a little bit more smoother results. But you can add all of your tones onto the model at once. I choose not to. I choose to go one colour, get it to where I want it to be, and then move on to the next. There's nothing stopping you from slapping on your shadow, your mid and your highlight tone all on the same time and blending it all in. Pretty much the same as wet blending with acrylics. I've done it a few times and I prefer to have the control of going colour by colour and then gently blending, rather than slapping them all on and just letting them all sort of mush into one. You can see we've got some absolutely stunning results. We've got deep shadows, but we've got a slight problem in that with all of this blending there isn't a lot of definition between the lights and darks. So now I'm making a black oil pin wash. This needs to be very watered down with white spirit or mineral spirits, just so it goes down in all of the cracks and crevices. But this stage will provide us with tons of definition. It will help us to pick out the details and to see the areas that may well just not be looking so good, that may be looking a bit shabby and need a little bit more attention and need a little bit more love. I add this to pretty much the whole model. With the grey areas, I slap it into them as well, because I chose grey as my mid-tone for all of the embellishments on the armour, and they need to be darkened down quite a lot. The oils are all still wet, so I did have to go back in and lighten those colours up again, just by adding some more white, just to bring them out, because the black wash did mix with some of those colours. And we just needed to bring the vibrancy back up again, just so those high colours are looking really nice and strong. I left the model to dry overnight. Oil paints do have a tendency to take a lot longer to dry, but it's not that much of a problem. And in the morning I decided that I was going to try and help it to dry with a hot air gun. I'm in danger. Yeah, if you're going to try and dry your oil paints on models on a resin miniature, just use a hairdryer. do as I say, don't do as I do, otherwise you'll end up with a completely melted £25 resin miniature from Forge World. Don't do it. I finished off the model by doing acrylic edge highlighting. I used all sorts of different acrylics to do this. Unfortunately, I couldn't really film it because it was the next day and my tremors weren't any better. So I'm really sorry for that. I wanted this to be a complete start to finish, but because of how shaky I was, I just wasn't able to do it. I'll show some pictures at the end of the completed model, and I'm hoping next time my tremors will be a little bit more manageable and I'll be able to show off a complete process from start to finish. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And if you really want to take this Imperial Fists Praetor home with you, don't forget to support us on Patreon. You can support the channel for as little as £1 a month. And we'll be doing a draw for our Patreon supporters. Once a month, they will get a beautiful model that I have painted. Thank you very much, guys. Look after yourselves.